So what do people like to talk about? People like to talk about what they like. Starting your first Spanish lesson by teaching people how to talk about what they like is sure to create a fun and enjoyable experience for your students and get your classes off to a good start. So, to give you an anecdote, when I first started my Spanish studies, my first lesson plan included introductions, the alphabet, pronunciation of every possible letter combination, a tongue twister, numbers up to 30, math, telling time, and the difference between tú y usted with the verb ser. At the very end of this lesson, there were just 2 questions with te gusta. When I teach my students how to start speaking a new language, I believe that the first 90 days are the most important days in language acquisition. Before I introduce new ideas, I consider the following. Practical use. Can students use it right away? Frequency. How often is it used in daily conversations? Complexity. Is it something that will frustrate students or give them confidence? Enjoyable. Is it an activity that students like doing? And relevance. Is it something that my students would actually be talking about? The alphabet's hard to learn, and practical for a first class isn't used very often and certainly not enjoyable. Going over all the different pronunciation combinations on the first day is overwhelming. Learning numbers all the way up to 30 is in the same boat. And really, a tongue twister on the first day? How does that build confidence in students? Math? I thought this was Spanish class. Now that everyone has cell phones, how often do people ask each other what time it is? Again, it was just impractical. Finally, the difference between tú y usted, which doesn't even exist in English. Talk about starting my Spanish studies the wrong way. With these types of study plans in place, it's no wonder why it takes students so long to start speaking a new language. What if, instead of leading language classes from the view of language and grammar, we led our students through enjoyable conversational activities that were highly relevant to what they like to talk about, easy to learn, fun and practical, so they could start using the new language from the very first day? Dale Carnegie was one of the masters of human behavior, and while most people study him to be successful in business and sales, I believe that his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, should be required reading for every teacher in the world. When you learn how to win over your students by making class enjoyable, practical, and relevant, your influence will start growing immediately. Inspired, your students will learn more, study more, and practice more, which will shorten their path to becoming conversational. It's a snowball effect. In the above-mentioned book, Carnegie writes about a few basic principles that are important for language teachers to understand, which are to become genuinely interested in other people, your students, to be a good listener, to encourage your students to talk about themselves, to talk in terms of your students' interests, and to make your students feel important. Starting your first Spanish class with new students by making small talk and asking a lot of te gusta questions is a sure way to start off on a good foot with your students. It's practical, frequently used, easy to learn, enjoyable, and highly relevant to starting new conversations with Spanish speakers. This is something they will ultimately need to do in order to practice outside of class. It's a winning recipe. Here are the topics I use to make small talk on my first class. We talk about food, drinks, sports, and daily activities. So download these accompanying resources and check out some of the slides I use with a little more explanation on why I chose these slides. Also, if you've been following me, you can see how I've incorporated lots of comprehensible input so students understand what they're learning, encourage speech activities to reduce anxiety and the affective filter in the classroom, and lots of visual aids and extralinguistic context to help students negotiate meaning, all included in these free slides that you can use today and customize depending on the specific set of students that you use. Alrighty, ciao.